Did you know that despite having consulted as many South African wine historians as I could possibly get my hands on, I am still no closer to figuring out exactly how Cabernet Sauvignon actually arrived in South Africa. Of course, there are various milestones that we can reference along the way. So we know that in 1973, the South African Wine of Origin labeling system came into being. And in that year, Stellenbosch giants Canon bottled their first Cabernet Sauvignon along with a whole bunch of other guys. Although it should be noted that in 1973, the original stipulation said that you really only needed 30% Cabernet in the bottle in order to use Cabernet on the label. Thankfully, it's gotten a little more stringent since then. But we can actually go further back than 1973 because we know that labels like Zonneblom and Alto and Nederburg were making Cabernet, or at least Cabernet-ish wines as far back as the mid-60s. Historian Joanne Gibson says that Alto had their first Cabernet vintage in 1965, and the oldest image that Nederburg have of one of their Cabernets comes from 1966. But we can actually go even further back than that, because in 1926, Professor Abraham Perald, who of course was the father of Pinotage, wrote in his book about winemaking and viniculture that Cabernet was a very, very important grape that would help to improve the quality of wines coming out of the Cape winery. He also acknowledged at the time, though, that Cabernet had very low yields compared to a kind of monster yielder like Cinsault. But he went on to say that despite the poor short-term economic picture that Cabernet painted, he was convinced that wine farmers and winemakers would regret not planting Cabernet in order to have the kind of richer, bigger, darker Cabernet juice in their wines. And because we know that Perald was a cautious and rigorous scientist, he wouldn't have written something like that unless he'd already been observing Cabernet for some time. So we can deduce that, at least by 1926, the proliferation of Cabernet was already a thing. But we can go even further back. And thanks to an article by historian Tim James, we know that Cabernet Sauvignon was already in the ground in Grootconstantia by 1888 to 1889, because there was a parliamentary report that already talked about extensive Cabernet plantings at Grootconstantia. We also know that there is a photo of a bottle of Cabernet de Sauvignon from Grootconstantia with the vintage 1903 on it. Tim James points out that probably there were earlier vintages than that, but that's the first one we have evidence of. And given the state of the wine world at the time, this could easily be one of the first cultivar bottles of Cabernet in the world.